All right, let's say our La'asok B'divrei Torah blessing together. Baruch
Baruch
atah
atah
Adonai
Adonai
Eloheinu melech
melech
haolam
haolam
asher
asher
kiddushanu
kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu
La'asok
so
B'divrei Torah.
Torah.
Okay, praise to you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who's made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. All right. Herb, would you read the Me'ein Sheva on 1 foot, please?
The Me'ein Sheva is a mini repetition of the Shabbat evening Amidah on Friday nights. How did the Me'ein Sheva come to be? Because the daily prayer services replaced the daily sacrifices of the temple, it was clear that the morning and afternoon services were obligatory. The evening service was less obvious. To mark the fact that it was not based on a daily sacrifice, it was decided that the evening service would only have a silent Amidah without a repetition, though some think that at one time, every evening Amidah had a repetition.
Okay.
According to Rashi in Babylonia, people who came late to Shabbat evening services had to walk home alone in the dark because they finished later than everybody else. To avoid this, the Me'ein Sheva was put in place as a mini repetition so that everybody could finish together. This mini repetition also makes Shabbat different from the other days of the week, where there is no recapitulation of the themes of the evening Amidah.
Thank you. All right. So, questions so far before we start looking at the actual prayers?
So the implication I'm getting is that the evening Friday service in the temple included a sacrifice. They weren't using Shabbat as an excuse, if you will, to not slaughter an animal at that time.
Correct. There were the regular morning and afternoon sacrifices in the temple on Shabbat, and then there were additional sacrifices because it was Shabbat, which later on, after the temples were destroyed, became the Musaf service, the additional part of our service to reflect the additional sacrifice for Shabbat, also for holidays.
Okay.
So yes, they were still slaughtering animals as sacrifices on Shabbat.
So that was not considered work when it was done in the temple, I presume. But outside the temple probably was considered work.
Yes, that sounds right. Although outside the temple, it would have been for the purpose of food as opposed to for the purpose of connecting with God. Because you wouldn't offer sacrifices outside of the temple. Other questions about what we have gone over so far?
David, was Kabbalat Shabbat added after, in decade or centuries after adding the repetition of the Amidah? What was the sequence of that, the chronology, excuse me?
Yeah, so Kabbalat Shabbat was invented by the Kabbalists in the 1500s in the land of Israel, in Tzfat. And they did it based off of a short mention in the Talmud of two rabbis that would go out to greet the Shabbat bride as she was coming in. And so the Kabbalists, A, wrote Lachadodi based off of this idea, and B, created a whole section of the service based off of this idea. Rashi lived before this happened, and Rashi is talking about the Me'ein Sheva service or section of the Friday night service. So therefore, the Me'ein Sheva was added before Kabbalat Shabbat. Kabbalat Shabbat also helps with people coming in late being able to leave together.
if there was no evening sacrifice, correct?
Correct.
So when you wrote the evening service was less obvious, what was there that made it? Was there an affirmative statement about why it was why it was instituted?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was instituted because not only were the daily services attached to the sacrifice, but they were also justified on grounds of verses in the Bible where it seemed that the patriarchs prayed. So the examples that were cited were in the story of the Amidah, the binding of Isaac, when it says that Abraham rose early in the morning. The rabbis take that phrase out of context and look at it just by itself, and they're like, oh, he must have gotten up to either talk to God or daven shacharit, depending on how anachronistic you want to be about things. And so Abraham must be the reason why we have the morning service. And the afternoon service, they give credit to Isaac for this one, because when Rebecca was coming back from her hometown, she sees Isaac and he is meditating in the fields. And which seems to imply that he is deep in thought. And the rabbis are like, oh, he must be in thought where he is connecting to God, or he is in thought davening mincha, the afternoon service. Again, depending on how you want to look at it. And they're like, well, we've got Abraham, we've got Isaac. Does Jacob talk to God at night? Why, yes, he does. And this one they find credit for in the story of Jacob's ladder, where Jacob is running away from his brother Esau after Jacob has tricked their father into giving the blessing for the older son to the younger son, in this case Jacob. Esau, as the older son, is furious, wants to kill Jacob. Jacob runs away, and he finds a place to rest. And the rabbis take a verse from this story and say Jacob must have been talking to God in the evening, or perhaps he was davening the evening service, Mariv or Arvit. So
for the evening service, we're not wrestling with God?
No, I don't believe so. I'll double check that, but I don't believe so.
Okay.
Not to extend this unduly, but those are all the post hoc justifications, ingenious, for what they were doing anyhow. Is that right? They were having an evening service, and then they found verses. I'm just asking. I don't.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I'll investigate further. But it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. Other questions? Okay. Seeing none, let's get on with the first prayer. Don, would you read Vayechu, please, in English?
Certainly. The heaven and earth were finished, and all their array. On the seventh day, God finished the work that had been undertaken. God ceased or rested on the seventh day from doing any of the work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, having ceased on it from all the work of creation that God had done.
Thank you. And then some context.
This is from the biblical book of Genesis, chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, describing the seventh day of creation in the first creation story. It is the first time that Shabbat is mentioned in the Torah. The rabbis changed the vowels of the word Vayihulu, they were completed, to read Valchulu, they completed, in order to teach that people are partners with God in completing creation. Vayachulu is included in the Shabbat Marav Amidah and repeated in the Me'ein Sheva because it is so important. Abu Avraham, 1300 Spain, says it is important to repeat the Vayachulu so that all Israel has heard and joined in it, regardless of gender or age. According to the Babylonian Talmud, it is important to say Vayachulu out loud as a testament to Shabbat and to God's creation, because testimony in a Jewish court is offered while standing. This part is said while standing, and usually the rest is said standing too.
Finally, the question.
Things that are holy are different from those that are ordinary. How do you make Shabbat different from the rest of the week?
Thank you. So if we're saying that Shabbat is holy, that means it's not the same as ordinary. So there are a variety of right answers, and I will go out on a limb and say there are no wrong answers, at least in this setting. So I open it to you guys. How do you make Shabbat different from the rest of the week?
Well, I won't speak necessarily for myself, but part of the ways of making Shabbat different is not working on that day, not doing physical labor even around your house, presumably, and not dealing with money.
Okay.
And I don't say that necessarily explains me, but there is something that I've heard more than once recently about God resting on Shabbat. And that is that on Shabbat, he created things such as the lamb, or the ram, I should say, that Abraham saw during the Akedah, and several other little things, if you will, quotations around little things that are mentioned in the Bible, but they're not really talked about as being part of the first 6 days.
Yeah.
But he really,
So I'll tweak that slightly. That comes from a statement at the end of Pirkei Avot, and what it says at the end of Pirkei Avot is that right before Shabbat started, God created the things that seem to break the rules of creation. So, for instance, the talking donkey was created right before Shabbat. And the spot where the earth opens up, like a super localized earthquake to swallow Korach, that was created right before Shabbat. Some say that the first tongs were created right before Shabbat because you need tongs in order to make tongs. So where did the first tongs come from? God must have made them right before Shabbat. But in general, it's reserved for the bugs of creation that are actually written into the code. They are a feature. Great, thank you. Other thoughts about how you make Shabbat different from the rest of the week?
Different food, perhaps. Eat different things.
Refraining
I was a
from using
child,
technology, I would think, these days.
we light candles on Shabbat. When I was a child, my family, my relatives all had chicken and chicken soup for Friday night dinner.
Oh, right, yeah.
Somehow, I think that, observing Shabbat, whether I go to synagogue or just live stream from down here, whatever, it makes me feel a little special as a Jew, because I know I'm doing something or not doing something that other Jews around the world, different genders, different ages, different whatever, are doing, which is distinct from what my Gentile friends might be doing, or other acquaintances might be doing on a Friday night. I mean, sometimes I might do the same as them, but the times that I try to observe Shabbat, it makes me feel more Jewish, where I can't say that like on a Wednesday night, for example. Although Monday night I can say it if I'm taking this class, that makes me a little different. A little more Jewish. So, yeah, Hooray for Monday nights, but you get my
Right.
idea.
And you're brainwashed.
It's a time that brings community together. I mean,
Yes.
most of us don't, I'm speaking for myself, don't daven 3 times a day, but you know, going to Saturday morning service and making that a special time, putting on nicer clothes and sharing kiddush afterwards with friends. Makes it a special time.
Well, for our family, it was Friday evening when the children were growing up, and now they are well into their adult years, and they still remember that as something very important. That time for family focus at home. So that's one of the reasons I mentioned was significant when we were scattered and during the pandemic. That my son of all people took the initiative to start these Friday evening Shabbat through Zoom, where we lit the candles and said Kiddush and blessed the bread, and we spent an hour and a half talking. So that's something that carried over from when the children were very young, when they were still with us. So that's special to us in that sense.
One thing that was very different was we never drove to shul on Shabbat like we do today.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I like about Shabbat is it seems like it's a day when you really kind of can express gratitude. You know, during the week, you know, you're reading the prayers and you're praising God, but really more, it seems like on Shabbat, it's really when you express your gratitude for, you know, for what you have.
We have more nicer, no, I don't know how to say nicer, fancier music on Shabbat, you know, more upbeat music in our new sock and so forth than during the week. So that makes it special.
I think it's kind of a relaxing day also. It's tends to, for me anyway, to slow me down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do without my computer. I don't always turn it off at the time one should, but I leave it off.
Yeah.
So, and I find that in a way difficult, but I think it's, but it's,
It's a good thing.
I make so many minor transgressions and maybe major ones, but that makes a difference in my week.
Being a unmannered young person, I very rarely eat dinner at the table, but on Shabbat, I do. So it's not in front of the television, or in this evening in front of the computer while during class. But you know, so that's one important difference. I enjoy all the. I mean, also just how the meal happens is very different. That you have the, for us anyways, have the prayers that we don't, you know, you don't do Kiddush, you don't do on other days, you know. They have challah, at least that makes most Fridays, so we don't have other days.
For me, it's the preparation that starts, I would say, even on today and on tomorrow, the thinking about it. So it's like where it comes up like a holiday where I'm like thinking about what we're gonna eat, you know, all the way down to the clothing, if I'm gonna invite somebody. So it's like the preparation, like each day, getting closer each day. So, you know, so everything will be prepared, you know, before the time comes. So it's the preparation for it.
The other thing I was going to mention is that, like this year, if I'm not mistaken, Yom Kippur coincides with Shabbat, or it will come October, and it almost makes Yom Kippur, whatever holiday, a little more special, because even though you're still going to fast and you're doing things, not Shabbat-esque. We still have a Shamru, and we still have Yismahu, and we still have some of the Shabbat liturgy and music, even though it's the most solemn day of the year when it falls that way. And that's very special in and of itself, I think. That, like, even as solemn and as crucial as Yom Kippur is, there's still a nod to Shabbat. So I kind of like that.
For me, I try to make Shabbat different from the rest of the week by trying to observe some of the laws, well, just the traditional laws. So I don't like, I mean, all the time, since I'm a graphic designer and training for that, I'm always using computers, technology, phones. I don't use any of that on Shabbos. So it creates a different atmosphere where I can kind of focus more on Torah study and things like that, and that's very special, especially since just because of the busyness of like working like during the week and then having the calm because of that.
Yeah, I try to do the same as somebody who uses a computer all day, every day for their job, be able to have one day where I'm intentionally not doing that and not interacting with those devices. And it sort of is also a nice reminder that they don't control me.
And I think the other thing for me is also like reading books. I don't get a lot of time to read books during the week, but it's like on Shabbos, since I'm not using like my computer or anything, like this kind of technology has a lot of entertainment value. It's like books, they kind of like phase out. But since I have time on Shabbat, I can spend that reading like just like normal books. So that's another way it's like a little different for me. I don't know if other people have that experience too.
I do. I find that books with plots tend to draw me in, and then I tend to stay up late at night. So at night I will only read nonfiction or short stories or things that can be put down easily. But I'll save my books with plots for Shabbat afternoon. And it's nice to be able to read at a long stretch at a time. Particularly now that my own child can read and not need constant entertainment. Other thoughts?
I would just like to add what Joseph said about preparation. I don't do the preparation, and I miss out on that. And I think and I know the rabbis talk about preparation as well. That might not have been strictly responsive to your specific question, but it was in the line of the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, there's something beautiful about preparation. About 3-4 years ago, Howard and I were in a movie theater in Evanston, and a guy sitting in front of us was an old friend of Howard's. His daughter was married, had 7 children, became very religious, lived in Jerusalem. And the movie was late, so he showed us a video of her kids from like age 2 up to age about 13, what they did Friday morning until the sun set and Shabbat started. Even the littlest 2-year-old had a job to do. One helped cooking, one cleaned, one vacuumed, one cleans the bathrooms, it was just beautiful to watch these 7 kids getting ready for Shabbat. And they were such joyous faces. It was beautiful. It was better than the movie that we saw.
All right, so there are a variety of tunes for Vayechalu. And I've brought you videos for the ones that I could find. I'm going to sing the two most common ones. So in this video, we have Vayechulu Hashamayim Ve'haaretz V'chol Tzevam Vayechal Elohim Bayom Hashvi'i Melachto Asher Asa Vayishbot Bayom Hashivi'i Mikol Melachto Asher Asa Vayevarech Elohim Et Yom Hashivi'i Vayekadesh Oto Kivo Shabbat Mikol Melachto Asher Bara Elohim La'asot. So that's one of the most common ones. And then in this video, we have the Lewandowski tune. Louis Lewandowski was a major 1800s composer. He wrote a number of tunes that are used today, like the one that is common for the Friday evening Kiddush, Kivanu V'charta, and Sadik Katamar, Sadik Katamar, Yifrach, and Unatana Tokef. Unatana Tokef Kiddushat Hayom. So that's Lewandowski. The tune that he came up with for Vayechalu is as follows. Vayechulu Hashmaim Va'aretz V'chol Tzevam Vayechal Elohim Bayom Hashvi'i Melachto Asher Asa Vayishbot Bayom Hashvi'i Mikol Melachto Asher Asa Vayevarech Elohim Et Yom Hashvi'i Vayekadesh Oto Kivo Shabbat Mikol Melachto Asher Bara Elohim La'asot. So a little bit faster, a little bit more perfunctory. You can decide which tune you think fits better with the mood of the words. I brought you a link where you can see this tune being used in a Brazilian synagogue. If you prefer, there's a Latinized version of Vayechalu that you can see here. And there's a group called Shlach which does Jewish parody songs. And here's a video where they have set Vayechalu to Here Comes the Sun. So I'll send you the source sheet and you can check out these videos tomorrow. All right, let's go on to Me'ein Avot. Samantha, would you read this, please?
Okay. Praise are you, O Lord, our God and the God of our ancestors, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, the great, mighty, and awe-inspiring God, the God Most High, creator of the heavens and earth, shield of our ancestors with the divine word, guarantor of life to the dead, holy God beyond compare, who bestows rest to God's people on the holy Shabbat, who takes pleasure in them and invites them to rest. We will serve God with awe and fear and offer our thanks to the divine name day after day. The source of blessings, God worthy of thanks, the master of peace, sanctifies Shabbat and blesses the seventh day, causing to rest in holiness a people overflowing with delight. This day that recalls the act of creation.
Thank you. And would you be willing to go on? No, that's a lot. I'll ask someone else. Well, this is a lot of context, so we'll bring in some more readers. Thank you, Samantha.
You're welcome.
Benjamin and Lisa, would you guys take on the next 4 paragraphs, please?
Starting with context.
Yep.
Context. This is the Me'ein Avot prayer. It encapsulates the 7 blessings of the Shabbat Amidah into one prayer. Note that the traditional Nusach mode for this section of the service is called Me'ein Avot. This prayer requires a minyan, 10 adult Jews, because it is like the repetition of the Amidah. Passover is considered a time when God is extra watchful over the Jewish community, so we don't recite this paragraph since it starts by describing God as a shield. On Shabbat Shuvah, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we recite Ha'el HaKadosh, Holy God, with Hamachel HaKadosh, Hamelach HaKadosh, Holy Sovereign.
The introductory paragraph before Magan Avot starts the same way as the first Avot, first paragraph of the Amidah. It deviates after Elyon by going straight to Kone Shemayim Va'aretz instead of Gomel Hasidim Tovim V'Kone Hakol. This is a more faithful quote from Genesis 14:22. Elyon Kone Shemayim Va'aretz, and connects back to Vayachulu prayer, which also references Shemayim and Aretz, heaven and earth. By doing this, the prayer makes the point that Shabbat is the culmination of the creation of the heavens and earth and everything on them.
It is worth noting that there are 2 versions of the words for Me'ein Avot. Most texts use Me'ein HaBrachot, meaning like the blessings, as in not the full blessing, but something like them. There was a version found in the Cairo Geniza that had Mahon HaBrachot, meaning the source of blessings. This is probably the original version.
Magen Avot ends with Zechir Lamaseh Vereshit, a memorial to creation. Abidaraham points that while Shabbat is also associated with the Exodus from Egypt, per the Deuteronomy version of the Ten Commandments, the most fundamental meaning of Shabbat is a commemoration of creation. Creation came before the Exodus it's also in the first version of the Ten Commandments. The Exodus.
Yes. Thank you. So at this point, thank you for reading that. At this point, we have about 15 minutes left this evening. I want to show you what's left and then get your thoughts as a group about how we should proceed. So there are 7 blessings in the Shabbat Amidah. The Me'ein Avot prayer touches on each of the themes of those 7 blessings. So it's a encapsulation of everything. We have coming up in the source sheet each of those phrases and a discussion question for them, plus some videos, and then one more prayer, a question, and a couple more videos. Do we want to make this a second week? Or do we want to pick and choose and then be done with it this week?
Next Monday is Labor Day.
Correct. We're not going to meet next Monday either way.
Okay.
I would be in favor of going through these next 2 weeks from today.
Yeah, or we'll make it too quick.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Well, it seems there's a lot to cover yet, so we might as well continue it.
Okay. Great. So we will plan to continue this. We'll keep going at least for the next little bit, and then we'll pick this up in 2 weeks.
Can I ask a question that's a little bit off of going back maybe to the beginning of the session today? There are people who for 6 days during the week, they study Talmud, they study all Hebrew texts from morning to evening. What about study on Saturday? Doesn't that make study for them work?
It's not work if they're enjoying it. They might not study with the same aids, so they might not look up things online. But if you are doing Daf Yomi, where you study one page of Talmud every day and finish the Talmud in 7.5 years, that includes studying a page a day on Shabbat and on Yom Kippur and on the day of the first Seder. Like, you don't stop.
But if I enjoy doing carpentry work all week long, isn't that also work if I do that on Shabbat?
Sure.
Enjoyment isn't the only part of it that makes it work or not
No,
work.
it's not. So there are two explanations as to what defines work on Shabbat. One is that God didn't create on the seventh day. So anything that we do that creates something new is not okay to do on Shabbat. So if I draw, I have created a mark that was not there before. Therefore, that would not be Shabbostic. That would not be something appropriate to do on Shabbat if I am not, quote, working on Shabbat.
What if I sell you groceries? What's
So-
that creating?
So selling groceries falls into the category where it says in the Ten Commandments, not only should you not work, but you shouldn't cause anybody else to work. So if I am going to the store on Shabbat, I am doing my part to create an incentive for people to have to show up on Shabbat.
Mhm.
It's not creating, you're right. But it is that that's more of the classical getting paid to do work sort of definition of work. The third category of work for Shabbat is things that were done to create the tabernacle, the Mishkan. And the reason that this comes into play is that in Exodus 31, I think, somewhere towards the end of Exodus, it says, do not do any melacha, any work on Shabbat. And the next sentence says, and this is the melacha, the work that was done to create the tabernacle. And so the rabbis are like, oh, we're going to play chutes and ladders and say that if melacha equals tabernacle work, then in this sentence, then melacha still equals tabernacle work in that sentence. So from this, they derive 39 categories of work that were done to build the tabernacle or to get the tabernacle up and going. So this involves things like carpentry, which makes sense. It also involves steps for baking, because there was challah in the tabernacle every day, or there was bread of some sort at least. So steps for baking extends all the way back to agriculture.
That's true.
Because you can't bake if you don't have any wheat to start with.
So would that have precluded the tabernacle from being erected on Shabbat after they
Yes.
traveled a ways?
Yes.
Okay.
You cannot build on Shabbat. Now, building on Shabbat, so when these things come into play, literally, as to like how they affect us today, for instance, if my daughter wants to use her Legos on Shabbat, then the question of can she use her Legos on Shabbat is she building, and is it permanent? So if she's building something with the intention of taking it down at the end of the day, then that's fine. That's quote Shabbostic. If she's building something with the intention of gluing it in place later and having it be permanently up, then that is what we call muksa. That is not appropriate for Shabbat. Because now she's creating something.
She's younger than 13, so isn't she exempt?
So, yes, and some say that there's a gray area between if you're older than 3 and you know what you're doing, then you should start doing it right so that you're practicing. Think about the example that Norma gave with the video of all those kids getting ready for Shabbat. Mm-hmm. They are getting ready for Shabbat because A, if you want to have your house really clean, there's a lot to be done. And B, you are teaching the next generation how to live so that when they hit bar and bat mitzvah, they're not like, whoa, what did I just get myself into? They're like, oh yeah, okay. I know what's going on here. I've been doing this for the last 18 years.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The other thing that I will say, going out on a limb here, is that there's the spirit of Shabbat and there are the laws of Shabbat. So I'm not going to say prescriptively what you should do, but I will merely say descriptively, there are those who rest on Shabbat by doing things that fall within the laws of what you do and don't do in Shabbat. And there are those who rest on Shabbat by doing things that are within the spirit of Shabbat. So for instance, knitting. Knitting would definitely be muksa according to the laws of Shabbat. Because you are creating something with the intention of it being permanent. I mean, you can undo it, but that's not what your intention is. So God didn't create on Shabbat, we don't create on Shabbat. And even though I don't think there was any, I don't know that if there was anything knit in the Mishkan, there were things that were sewn, and that's effective, close enough for our purposes. On the other hand, if knitting is relaxing, there are those who say, this is how I rest on Shabbat. I don't have time to knit the rest of the week. It's not like I'm knitting because I'm making things that I'm selling. So this is how I do Shabbat. Now I will say in my family, where my wife does knit and my daughter is learning how to knit, we don't knit on Shabbat. I am not per se encouraging you to knit on Shabbat. However, I am saying that there are those who there are those who would say things that fall into the spirit of Shabbat. That's one way of looking at it. I received a comment that a direct comment in the chat just now that has to do with intention. No, intention is a piece of it, but that marital intimacy is encouraged on Shabbat. It's described in some situations as the double mitzvah. And even if this leads to creating, that's not said you can't do that. The idea of intention is also relevant for Shabbat. So for instance, turning on a light, there are those who say this is not okay because a spark, because one of the few things the Torah does explicitly say is not to kindle a spark on Shabbat. And according to the Ben Franklin lightning on a kite and a key experiment, sparks are electricity, or electricity is sparks. So no electricity on Shabbat. If you are walking through a room and you have motion sensors in your house that turn on the lights, if your intention is to get from point A to point B, and you would do it whether or not the lights turned on, then that's fine. If your intention is to turn on the lights by walking that route, then that would be considered not fine. So there are a lot of different aspects of Shabbat once you start getting into the weeds of it. The big picture is it should be a day of rest. It should be a day that's different from the rest of the week. It should be a positive experience in your life, not something to drive you crazy. So,
Well, David,
yes.
you didn't have to worry about going out on a limb because we can't cut it off on Shabbat. You're safe.
Phew. All right. And on that note, I'm going to end the recording, and then I'll take questions after we stop, because I know it's about 9 o'clock.